Today is May 25th, 2010. We're located at a historic KRE Studios in Berkeley, California. We're talking to broadcast legend Ken Ackerman. Your interviewer is Steve Kushman. And Ken, usually we start at the very beginning. So could you tell us where you were born?
All right. This goes back to 1922, February 18th, 1922. That makes me 88 years of age today. Don't feel a year of it. Anyway, I came out of the womb of an 18-year-old girl in that February date, 1922. She was 18. My father was 25. And I had, after I was born, she gave birth to a sister. That was in 1923. Then another brother in 1924. And another sister in 1925. And by that time, at the age of 21, she was a basket case. Today, she could have been saved, because today they would call that postpartum depression. In those days, they thought of it as a mental disease. And that poor soul, she was sent to an institution and stayed there for the rest of her 38 years. And I have no recollection, no memory of her at all. Anyway, after that, I was in an orphanage for a short time with my sister. And my father piled my sister and me in a Model T Ford and drove west to my grandparents, to his mother and father, the grandparents' place in the Sacramento Valley. And it was a kind of a rough ride. He made the mistake of leaving in October, which was the start of the bad weather. We got as far as, I think it was Cheyenne. We got as far as Cheyenne, and the Army stopped everybody and sent them south to what eventually became Highway 40. So we went across the highway to Lower California, then up the Sacramento Valley, I guess probably Highway 99 at that time, and ended up in my grandmother's place. And I will tell you that the best thing you can do is get away from your parents at a very early age, say 9 or 10 years of age, and be raised by grandparents. That was the most wonderful experience, being raised by grandparents on a farm in the Sacramento Valley. A small farm, but a farm. And we had everything there, from the swimming hole to chickens and turkeys and cows and, everything that a kid would enjoy. And that's pretty much it in the formative years.
What about, how about your schooling?
Yes, I went to a wonderful grammar school. It was called Rio Linda Grammar School. Rio Linda now is a different place than it was in those days. In those days, Rio Linda was... it was all mostly Protestant. We were the only Roman Catholic family there. And I remember Father Murphy used to come out in his air-cooled Franklin car and gather up what few Catholics were in the Sacramento Valley, in that part of the valley. And he would take us to catechism lessons. And that was a great experience, too, riding on the fender of a Franklin air-cooled car. Wonderful.
Before the safety codes.
Yeah, well, he probably had maybe 6 or 8 kids.
Oh, that's fun.
But he was a taskmaster. He was a frightening man in a way. But that was the formative years. And from there, I went to a school called Grant Union High School. That was in East El Paso Heights in North Sacramento. A great school, a very progressive school, and the fellow in charge was named Bill Rutherford. And Bill was a great man, a good man. He was a colonel in the Army, and he would sit at his desk in the high school in his colonel's uniform. But the school was so progressive that we had a theater organ in the auditorium. George Wright was the organist.
Oh.
And Olympic-sized swimming pool and the greatest classrooms. Just a wonderful school. Anyway, I mentioned Bill Rutherford, but Bill and I and George Wright were in the auditorium in 1939 doing radio programs which were broadcast on KROY by transcription. And George was down in the pit, and Bill Rutherford was at the cage microphone along with me, and we had shared no, we didn't share the mic. We had two separate microphones. And so here I was, a little kid of about 17 years of age, playing announcer and having a lot of fun doing it.
And you were announcing the George Wright tunes that he would then play.
No, the program was called Know Where You Live. And these were stories of the history of California written by Charles Christie, which was he was an instructor at the school. And I would start the program. Let's say, no, George would start the program. The school song. And I would say, Grant Union program, know where you live. I guess that's the way I sounded in those days. But anyway, then we did the half-hour narration on these wonderful stories. I have a few of the transcriptions. Luckily, I was able to get my hands on them. But they're interesting to hear and very, very informative.
They were a good snapshot of the times.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And I was able to get through the programs. I've stumbled once or twice, as a kid is bound to do. But it was a wonderful experience. And I recall when I graduated in 1940, and it was, let's see, in the summer of 1940, I was walking down 7th Street. No, I was walking down I Street towards 7th Street in Sacramento. And my eyes looked across the street at this beautiful cream and green building. And it said on the side of the building, KFBK. And I thought, that's the station I listen to, KFBK. I've got to go across the street and see what that's all about. Well, fortunately, the program director of the station was standing on the sidewalk, smoking a cigarette, because the fire marshal and Eleanor McClatchy would not allow smoking anywhere in the building, because the KFBK studios were right next to where they printed the newspapers, and, you know, that would have been quite a conflagration. Anyway, he was standing there, and I went over, and a brave little kid walked up to him and said, "Hi, you work for KFBK?" And he said, "Yes, I work for KFBK." And I told him about my experience at Grant High, and how I did radio programs from there, and they were broadcast on KROY, and he knew of the station KROY, of course. And I told him that I was sort of interested in radio. He said, "You want to be a radio announcer?" And I said, "Oh, a radio announcer? Oh, sure." So he went through the glass doors with me, flipped his cigarette in the gutter, took me into a studio, sat me down, went into the control room, and got on what I perceived to be a talkback. I didn't know where I was or anything about it. And he said, "Now, what I want you to do is describe everything you see in this studio." There was saxophone in the corner. They had a good band there. And I described the acoustical holes in the wall, why are they there, and that sort of thing, and the table, chair, everything I could think of. And Tony Kester, that was his name, program director, he came down and said, "So you want to be a radio announcer, huh? Can you start Saturday? Can you believe that? That's a true story."
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Never happened.
That's like Hollywood movie stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's great.
That's where I got.
And how old were you then?
I was. I would have been 19.
19.
Yeah.
And you were out of school then?
I was 18. 18. Yes, I was out of school.
You just got out of school. So did you get a full-time job at the station?
I got a part-time full-time job. I worked at KFBK as an announcer. I worked at Payless Drug Store on K Street as a salesman. And I was going to Sacramento City College. 3 things going. As a result, I drove my grandmother's car end over end on the way home at 1 o'clock in the morning one time. And today I can remember tumbling around in that car. And there was a fellow who was plowing the fields at night. They plowed the fields at night there because it was cooler. And he heard the crash, I guess, and he swung his headlights around, came up to me and said, "Are you hurt?" And I said, No, I live right down the road. I'm just going to walk down. So I walked down to my grandmother's place, and I woke her up and said, "Grandma, I wrecked your car. She said, are you hurt? I said, no. She said, well, go to bed. Great woman. A great woman, yes.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Did you take any broadcasting classes? Were there any such things when you were in college in
Yes.
conjunction with your working at the station?
Yes, when I was in Sacramento City College, I took a broadcasting course there. And because of my experience at Grant High and my experience at KFBK, I was light years ahead of what they were teaching. So I dropped out of that. I remember now doing a commercial for a class. Teal, do you remember Teal toothpaste?
No, before my time.
Just before my time now. Anyway, that's pretty much my Sacramento experience. Oh, and then I decided I worked there for a couple of years, year and a half, something like that. I decided I wanted to go to big town, San Francisco, the Bay Area. So I did. I pulled up. The war had started by that time.
Before we get there, how long were you at KFBK?
For 1940, for late 41, then Pearl Harbor, and it was in the first winter, I think, of 1942 that I decided I wanted to come to San Francisco.
How long were you part-time there before you went full-time? Did you ever go full-time at KFBK?
Yeah, I did, yes.
And these were combo announcing and playing music shifts in this day? We had the Red Network, the Blue Network, and the California radio system. So we had 3 stations going, and you were basically doing the local fill-in between the networks.
Between the network shows, and we had local shows. There was a singing group, a country and western group called the Maddox Brothers and Rose. I don't know whether anybody's heard of the Maddox Brothers and Rose. But they were great.
Yeah.
And we had other studio programs. Oh, and they had a great studio theater organ. And there was an organ player who stayed around all day long just in case the network failed. His name was Emil Martin, and he eventually became the general manager of the station years later. And it was a sweet-sounding organ. And if and when there was a failure, he would hop on the console and start playing. That was a wonderful studio setup. It was a very modern, for its stage. The chief engineer was a fellow with the name of Hap Webster. Anybody hear of Hap Webster? Well, he was very innovative. And I remember, there was a call for, there was a metal drive in 1941, scrap metal drive. And Hap Webster brought in what in that time was the equivalent of a dumpster. And I remember seeing going into that dumpster tons of wires, it seems, and some things that I couldn't quite understand what they were. They were boxes about that big, and they said on the side, KFBK. They were microphones. Oh. They went in the dumpster. All sorts of things that would be... KRE would love to have them today.
Yes. Well, they helped the war effort, though.
Yeah.
And then you in San Francisco. When did you come to the city here?
Yes, it was in the first winter of 1942. Let's say January of 1942. That I went to San Francisco with some trepidation, of course.
Did you give notice and quit your job at KBFK, or did you go exploring while you still had that job? No,
I went direct to KCBS. It was KQW at the time. That was the call letter. And I auditioned at the Pine Street studios of 1300 Pine Street in San Francisco. And the fellow who auditioned me was a fellow by the name of David Vail. And Dave was the chief announcer, in charge of things like auditioning budding announcers. But I remember Dave got me in the studio and had me read some copy, read news, and do a couple of commercials. And then he opened the studio door, the control room door, and yelled down the hall, "Hey, Craig, come here and hear this kid from Sacramento." And he heard me, and they hired me on the spot.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And what was the format of the station in those days?
It was CBS.
CBS.
CBS, yes.
So again, network programming with some local shows and local cut-ins.
Yes. Yes, that sort of thing. They sent me down to the San Jose studios because 51% of the station identifications on KQW had to come from San Jose because the station was licensed at that time for San Jose. So I went down there and we tried to submerge the San Jose location as much as we could on the air. We would say, KQW, San Jose. San Francisco Studios, Palace Hotel.
That's great. That's great. And any good stories? Any good memories of that? You were there long. How long were you there? KQW became
KCBS in 1949.
1949,
yes.
And you were at KCBS until
1995.
That's a good run.
Yeah, they fired me in 1995. Really, literally, they did.
That's a good run, though.
Good run.
Yeah, and you saw lots of changes.
Oh my Lord! You know, radio today is not at all like radio in those days. I enjoyed in radio the era of entertainment when they entertained. That was the object, to entertain. Now it's all information, and I'm sorry I ever got into the information phase. I never did like reading news, sitting for 2 hours on the air, reading news, punching in cartridges, that sort of thing. No.
And that's basically what was your job when they went to an all news format.
That's right. Yes.
That's right. And before that, talk about some of the local entertainment, if you could. That you guys used to do when you were KQW and KCBS before it went news.
We had variety programs. Dave McElhatton did a couple of variety shows. We had afternoon music shows. They had 3 orchestras. Ray Hackett was one. Ernie Gill early on. And who was the other one? I can't recall the other one. And had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studios. And each studio had a grand piano. Can you imagine that?
Wow. And this was on Pine Street still?
Large-size studios then.
Big, there were enormous studios. One studio was I think a 300-seat auditorium studio.
And this was on Pine Street in San Francisco?
No. This was at the Palace Hotel.
No, the Palace Hotel. That's right.
Yes. The building was designed, of course, by CBS and patterned after Columbia Square.
Los Angeles.
Everything the same. The chairs were the same. Everything the same. The colors were the same. And at one time there were studios 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they took a wall out, a long wall between 1 and 2, and made that one large auditorium studio.
And were all the live programs that were done then, were they all transcribed while they were going on? Were there transcriptions made of everything?
Not everything, no. It was mostly live.
Mm-hmm.
The dance remotes were all live. Whenever we would go out, we'd go down to the Palace Hotel.
But I mean, during any of this live things, were there ever on-site transcriptions made, EPs
oh, yes.
made?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I have some that I've been able to salvage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great.
Ken, how often was your voice sent out over the networks?
Oh, well, many times. But one specific program I remember vividly, was 1947 when a French singer by the name of Jean Sablon came to the Bay Area to sing in the Palace Hotel, in the Venetian room of the Palace Hotel. No, not the Venetian room, the Venetian room of the Fairmont Hotel. And they did auditions for who would be the announcer for this program. And fortunately, I won the audition. It was for Richard Hudnut, the cosmetics firm out of New York. And it was really high-class stuff. I mean, they sent a director up from Hollywood. I think it was Bill Robeson up from Hollywood. And I remember that night in the studio, the music director was a fellow by the name of Tutti Camerata. You may know that name. And they called him Toots Camerata. Well, the program started out with me saying, Richard Hunt out of New York and Paris bring you Jean Saint-Blanc. And then he would start to sing his Vous que possessons mes voix, his theme song. And I would proceed to announce the program. It went flawlessly. God, we were so pleased. And that's the highlight of my experience doing live network programs. And that was live. We had to do it twice. Once for the East and once for the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And I remember getting a very nice letter from the head of the agency, the advertising agency in New York. Said he was very pleased with my work, and if I'm ever in the New York area, come around. He'd like to meet me, and if ever they have properties that they require an announcer, you are it, or words to that effect. So they were pleased, and I was just delighted the way it went.
Did you ever get any more work out of him?
No more. But all in all, that was a good experience, good training for a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I was 23. Let's see, 42, 45, 46. Yeah, I was 25.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good story.
Can you use it?
Yeah,
of course.
Absolutely.
It's a great story.
Put it right in there. So you have some observations on some historical matters for us.
Yes, I joined the Coast Guard. I was in the Coast Guard, and I went in the Coast Guard because at KQW they had Coast Guard recruiting announcements. Seemed like every hour on the hour. 10-second announcements. Join the U.S. Coast Guard. Further your career and so and so. So I was so intrigued by this. I went to the Customs building in San Francisco, talked with somebody. He immediately signed me up. So I joined the Coast Guard. Went into public relations for the Coast Guard for a short time. And when I was off duty, the Coast Guard, I went to work for a short time for the Office of War Information. And I did newscasts. Some of the newscasts I read at dictation speed so they could be copied by ships at sea and land bases, by guys sitting at whatever they were sitting at and writing out while I was dictating. And all the time I was doing this, an officer with the OWI was sitting right beside me, making sure I didn't say anything that should not go on the air. Yeah.
How is that's a slow pace to read at?
Very slow pace.
Difficulty?
Difficult, yes.
Yeah.
You try to visualize somebody writing.
Yeah.
But then I did some regular broadcasts too. And all with the man sitting by my side, making sure I didn't send some secret message to the Japanese.
Or slip a word in that shouldn't be there, or...
Does that mean you were a shortwave broadcaster for a period of time?
For a period of time, I went on KWIX, I think it was. KWIX, or K...
It's KGEI also.
KGEI and KWIX, yes.
Okay.
Speaking of the Japanese, I have something rather serious, I think, to say about that, about the internment of the Japanese. You have to have lived in that period of time to understand what was happening and why the military did what they did. Unfortunately for them, Japanese were very secretive people. If you met them on a sidewalk, they would never meet your gaze. You could never interact with them, and they would seem to be a closed society. And all this had an impact, I'm sure, on the military. They thought, well, if the Japanese should launch an invasion of the California shore, which way are these people going to turn? They're going to turn toward the Japanese. And that was the thinking of the military at that time, unfortunately. That's my observation on it, and whether it's correct or not, I don't know.
Well, it's a good observation, and it's a piece of history that I'm sure a lot of Americans aren't real proud of, but we've got to move on and take it and learn from it and move on.
I think it's very appropriate we include that in
Yeah.
Because,
skip ahead here, because we got time, we got tape, and I want to know about the founding of the Broadcast Legends, which is a group that
Yes.
you are one of the founders, one of the lifelong members. We are all sort of members of Broadcast Legends here, as well as the California Historical Radio Society.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to know about this, how it was founded, who founded it, when it happened, and how it came together, and because it's a great organization. and another way of preserving our history.
It all started in an oyster house in Sonoma in 1992. A group of, I think it's 4 or 5 of us, Knowles Robertson, John Holmgren, who was the editor of the travel magazine, the AAA travel magazine, and who else? Chet Castleman, and there was one other, and I can't recall the name. Anyway, we met at the oyster. We were all in radio. We started, except for, well, John was in radio too. He did broadcasts on the radio. But we started talking about the good old days in radio and how wonderful it was and all this. And we had an idea. Somebody came up with a thought, well, why don't we start a club? And that was the germ of Broadcast Legends. And because I had so many contacts, I started making phone calls. The first month we had a meeting, we had 14 members. Then it jumped to 39, then 65, and all of a sudden now it's very near 300 members in Broadcast Legends, all going back to 1992.
And the Legends get together and have quarterly lunches?
We have quarterly luncheons, and we have our board meetings to set an agenda. And that's pretty much the history, the story of the Broadcast Legends.
And you've been a part, in several, as part of the players.
Yes.
And
the newscasts. Yeah.
And I'm going to be, for people who don't know what the Broadcast Legends do, they also put on these great radio plays and recreations of radio plays and stories with the sound effects.
I do the Bickersons and the Lone Ranger, and we recreate some of the old commercials that were on the air. Super Suds, lots of songs. Yeah, you know how those went.
Yeah, and also at every quarterly luncheon there is a newscast from a bygone era with. And it's always nice to compare the gasoline prices in 1940 to what they are now with those newscasts.
Do you remember when gasoline was 11 cents a gallon?
No. I remember when it was 25 cents a gallon, and that was...
What a price war. Simus Brothers in Oakland.
Yeah, that's why it's a price war, 25 cents a gallon, and that was it. But so the Legends continues to go on as a very viable group, and continues to attract a lot of members, and the Legends work very closely with CHRS and many of our endeavors. So we are very proud and glad to be associated with the Legends.
Well, what we're trying to do now at the Broadcast Legends is get as many young people involved as we can, because we're getting older. At 88, I'll be 2 years away from 90. How far can I go? But we're mostly old-timers in the upper echelon of Broadcast Legends, and we've got to get some young blood on the board and the young blood on stage doing the programs. And that's our endeavor.
And it'll happen. We keep getting the word out there. CHRS goes through the same thing, trying to get younger people interested in this technology.
And that inspiration comes from you, Ken, and a lot of others.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because when we see these great, wonderful, fruitful careers, and what fun you all had in broadcasting and in radio in those days, and it makes us want to be part of it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we're so happy that you've joined Broadcast Legends. That's great.
Yeah, so proud to be part of it. So you had some involvement with a famous motion picture and Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes. The motion picture was called The Birds, and Hitch and I made that movie in 1963. Anyway, no, he had a house in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and he enjoyed listening to music till dawn. He lived, for the most part, in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And when he did The Birds, he was a stickler for realism in his movies. If the camera went into a restaurant, the ashtray on a table had to be the ashtray from that, restaurant. So he wanted an announcer from the Bay Area. And as he tells the story, he was gathered around his advisors in Hollywood at Universal Studios at one time. And he said, we have this sequence in The Birds where it calls for an announcer. He said, who are we going to get? Oh, this is one of his advisors saying that. Who are we going to get? And he said, I looked at them as if they had two heads. I said, Mr. Ackerman, of course. So that's the way it started.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yes, and they flew me down to Hollywood, and they didn't wine and dine me, but they took me into a studio, and I went direct to film track. And they provided 2 hours recording time. They handed me the script. I read the script. It was all over in about 3 minutes. And I said to the technician, how does that sound? He said, it's fine, yeah. He said, is that it? I said, yeah, that's it. They had another almost 2 hours.
Of studio time was set aside for you.
Yeah, I explained to the technician at the time that I was a professional reader, and that's the way it happened. Yeah.
That's great.
Yes, and so we maintained a friendship over the years. And I remember once he sent me a recording, and he said, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You know how he talked.
Mm-hmm.
And then, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You, as I, are so fortunate to be able to listen to music till dawn. And my good friend Mr. Ken Ackerman, he always referred to as Mr. Ken Ackerman. He said, you know, I enjoy his music so much. I go to bed with Mr. Ackerman. I sleep with Mr. Ackerman. And he went on and on about all this stuff.
That's great.
And that was pretty much it on that sequence.
That's
but
great.
anyway, I've enjoyed residuals from the Byrds. Started out as pretty good residuals in 1964 up until, say, 1970. Then they've tapered off. The last residual payment I got, I think, was for $38. And by the time they take out of the $38, you're down to around $27 or less.
Talk to us about Music Till Dawn, because that was something you did for quite some time.
Yes. Dave McElhatton started Music Till Dawn and handed it off to, he started in 1955, 53, 55, along in there. And then in 1957, I think it was, or 58, he handed it off to me. He wanted to do daytime, go in the morning. He was going to be the morning personality. But when I took the program over, there were, I think, 6,000, if that, LPs. Very, very few LPs for a program of that dimension. And I built it up to very close to 60,000 LPs because I would go around to the warehouses and I would made good friends with all of the purveyors of LPs in the Bay Area. And they would send me, and I would take them home, catalog them, and take them to the studios, and they would go on the shelves of the studios. But at the end of Music Till Dawn, when it went off the air, and January 3rd, 1970, the station divided the LPs into 6 parcels, sent them over to KQED, and they were auctioned. And I think the station made, a lot of money.
What kind of music did you play? Was it popular music, classical, or a little of everything, jazz?
It started out as good music, popular music. I would play songs like Laura and beautiful music for the first half hour. Then immediately after midnight, we went to the classics. Light classics at first, and then the heavy symphonies in the middle of the broadcast, say around 3 in the morning, a Mahler. It was a pleasure to put on a 1-hour Mahler because I could go out to the music library and prepare the next day's program.
Yeah. You weren't doing newscasts also while you were doing this, were you?
On the hour.
On the hour, but
yes.
You weren't doing separate newscasts.
No.
So during.
Oh yes, I did. The program was on
out of the Music Till Dawn block. I mean, were you also doing newscasts?
Yes, I did one. I went on the air on Music Till Dawn at 11:30. Good evening. American Airlines greets you with Music Till Dawn. And then the beautiful theme would start. Went off the air at 6:30 in the morning. Yeah. 5:30 in the morning, 11:30 to 5:30, and then for a while I did a farm program from 5:30 until 6. Stayed around and did a newscast at 8:30. That was a long day.
That was a long night. Did you ever doze off? Did you ever hit the end of a record and have it go.
No, we had a technician on the
Board
glass.
operator.
Wake up, Mr. Ackerman.
And the station decided at one time, let's say it was in 66 or long in there, that they wanted to save money. So they built a little cubicle for me at the transmitter site. And shipped me out to the LPs and a teletype machine, everything they sent out to the transmitter. And they were going to save the cost of an engineer working in the Palace Hotel overnight. So, son of a gun. They sent me out there, and I was there, I think, 5 weeks, and they reversed it. They decided they made a big mistake and sent me back to San Francisco.
Was the transmitter on Mount San Bruno at the time?
No, that's Novato, right?
Novato.
At the Mudflats. And to go there, at 11:30 at night, I had to come to a barrier, a cowcatcher barrier, get out and unlock work a key, open the big gate, drive in, and close the big gate, rain or shine, and went into the studio and did the program. One harrowing experience was, there was a technician out there. His name was Ed Kingsland, and Ed was security conscious. And I would do while I was doing the program, my eyes were always fixing on what he had on the console. It was a revolver.
Ooh.
And I said, Ed, why do you have that gun here? What is that all about? And he said, this is not very safe. You got the airport over here, got that long road out here. Somebody could come out here and climb over that fence, come out and do some harm. But no harm is ever done. And thank goodness they had the foresight in San Francisco and the blue suits to reverse their original thought.
Bring it back.
Yeah, on the music for Till Dawn, did they have any network newscast during that time, or was it all local news? All local news.
Local, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a sort of a rip read. I would
Rip and read.
compile things from that.
Did you ever go out on any news stories here? Cover local news stories and actualities here? Were you mostly in
A
the
few,
studio?
but I didn't like doing that. They realized I didn't like doing that, so they kept me in the studio. I didn't like being there was one incident. There was a strike in San Francisco, and I can't recall who these roughneck guys were. And I went out to interview them on a picket line, and it was alongside the bay someplace. And I was talking with this guy, and he said, do you know how to swim? I said, yeah, I know how to swim. He said, you get out of here, we're going to pitch you in the bay, and you can swim. So I got out of there in a hurry. That was one harrowing experience for a young broadcaster.
That's why you liked it in the studio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I did.
All right. We're good?
Okay.
Thank you very
All
much,
right.
Steve.
My pleasure.
Bye.